Uh, Good morning, everybody. My name is Deborah Byrne from Deborah Byrne Psychology Services, known across social media as DBpsychology. And this week I'm going to talk about Down syndrome, which was this week's blog. You can find the link on www.deborahbyrne.com. So, Down syndrome. As I always say when I'm talking about these types of blogs, these are basic information. They're also meant to help try and break down the barriers around disability and mental health, and improve our own information in general, so that we can promote understanding, but that we can empower ourselves, so that when we hear about something, we'll say, no, that's wrong, or that's an incorrect notion you have there. This is in fact the truth. Let's break down those barriers and get working towards promoting better awareness. So, in saying all that, Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder, and it affects the physical development and causes mild to severe learning difficulties. That's the basics, okay? The exact causes and the diagnosis you'll find it in my blog, but I'll talk about the symptoms, and then I'll talk about what parents can do for themselves. So the symptoms, I'm not going to talk all of the symptoms. There's a lot of symptoms, there's a lot of related symptoms, if you like. They're maybe not directly caused by having Down syndrome, but they can happen because the child or the adult has Down syndrome. So basically, symptoms would be the physical symptoms, and I've listed all the physical symptoms out on the blog. Learning difficulties, as I said, ranging from mild, moderate to severe. Delayed development, and then you can have things like autism, ADHD, other learning difficulties, other learning disabilities that can occur together. So we're talking about the comorbidity there again. So they may have more than one learning difficulty. The other thing to watch out for would be, especially in teens, and this goes for any teen with a disability, depression can be very high, anxiety can be very high. That people on the autistic spectrum can also develop, in particular, is a depression as they get into their teens and they get into early adulthood. They can develop depression and general anxiety. And the other thing to watch out for would be OCD. So they can develop OCD. And I've talked about OCD before, and there is a blog about that. A few other ones would be congenital heart disease, sight and hearing problems, thyroid and sleep apnea can also occur. All can be helped, all can be treated. And then there's a whole load more. There are actually a very wide-ranging list of, I don't know whether we would really class them as symptoms, but they are conditions that do occur with Down syndrome. So do check those out. It's very important if you have a child that you understand that these things can happen, and to watch out for them and get intervention as early as possible. So as I said, the causes, I'm not going to go into the causes of the diagnosis this morning because it's already up on the blog. Now, in terms of parents, so early intervention is what you're going to need. And you'll probably find, if you've been down this road before, early intervention is usually done from birth, from the time the child is born. If they know prior to you giving birth that the child has Down syndrome, they'll start the interventions immediately. But upon diagnosis, they will usually start the interventions, because children with Down syndrome, babies with Down syndrome, are particularly vulnerable in their first year of life. And in saying that, I don't want to panic anybody, because life expectancy is getting better. The average life expectancy is now 60, and that is improving all the time. So, don't panic is my first thing to say to you. You are also, as a parent, going to have to deal with an awful lot of different specialists. That needs help and that needs support. You're going to need that. So get the support. And I would urge anybody in Ireland to contact Down Syndrome Ireland if this is what you're going through. Wonderful organisation, and they have lots of parents there who've been there and done that way before you, and they can give you, they are a wealth of information. I always say that to a parent with a disability, with a child with a disability. Another parent who has a child with a similar disability to yours will have a wealth of knowledge that no specialist can give you. And they are brilliantly supportive towards one another. That's what we do. I have disabled children, and that is what we do. We are very supportive towards one another. So in saying that, what else would I recommend? I'd also recommend you get counselling. And, that is very obvious. From my own point of view, getting counselling was very important. It helped me to express how I was feeling. And I've spoken about it before, that it was like getting thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool and not knowing how to swim. So knowing that it's important to be able to talk about your feelings and talk about what you're going through. And you may need to touch back into counselling at various times as your child gets older, even when they're adults. And also consider counselling for them, that they may need counselling in their teens or as adults. Learn what you can. That's the most obvious thing. As I said, learn what you can. Get in touch with Down Syndrome Ireland. Make sure that you have all the supports, the interventions in place for your child. Sometimes we don't know what we need to do, so therefore, again, I'd refer you back to, getting in touch with another parent. Generally, though, the hospitals and the people involved in education are really supportive, and they will give you the information. But sometimes you will come across a situation where they don't have the information. But somebody like Down Syndrome Ireland will have that information. Now, I do talk about assessment of need, and it's in the blog because it's a little bit detailed. Go and check it out. It is a legal obligation on the HSE to do it. So do have a look at that, and it's involving putting in place an individual education plan, getting the child assessed, and putting in an individual support plan in place, because they may need supportive living and that. And the next point too would also be to assess your education or options early. Always, I say to parents when they have a child with disability, you have to be thinking ahead years in advance. So you haven't got the luxury of enrolling your child in any old school. Sometimes you need to look at what your options might be for your child. Sometimes it can be mainstream school with learning support. That may be suitable for your child, but you have to look at what your child needs and then think ahead. So what can we access? What's available? Do we need transport? There's a lot of questions in there, and I do have a blog on assessing a school or your educational needs. I do have that, and it's up on what questions, detailed questions you can ask the school, and detailed questions you can ask yourself. And it's up on my blog at www.DBpsychology services. So do check that out. The next thing is self-care. I always come back to self-care. If you're not looking after yourself, if you're not looking after yourself as a couple as well, that's very important, then you can't look after anybody else. You really can't. You'll burn out, and you'll burn out very early. And it is so easy to do as a parent with a disabled child, let me tell you. You can burn out very quickly and very, very easily. So making sure that you are taking time for yourself, and make sure you're taking time for yourself as a couple, if you're in a partnership, or taking time with your other children. And that can be hard, particularly in the early days. And you've a lot of appointments and a lot of different specialists you're dealing with. But let me tell you, it does get better. It does get easier, and you'll be more open and more willing. I think that's really more what it is, to accept help. And that's what you need. You do need to accept help from family and friends. Then the next point would be encouraging the children. Encouraging the children and managing your own expectations. Please always come at it from a positive point of view. It makes a huge difference to the child and to the child's development. If you can manage your expectations to be more positive, if you can encourage them and encourage their strengths and encourage their independence and encourage them to be advocates for themselves, it makes a wealth of difference to these children. It really does. To any child with a disability, it makes a difference. And the other thing, and the last point I'll make this morning, is you've got to be prepared, just as you're preparing in advance for the different levels of schooling and different things you might need to access. You've also got to be prepared to make the transition, for them to make the transition into adulthood. That can be very difficult as a parent. I know myself, it's very hard to let go of the reins and to, let them out. You don't want to do that early, and maybe not at the same time as with other children. You don't want to let those reins go, but you do, and you have to trust that what you've done is everything that you can do, and you will do everything. You probably do a lot more than most, to make sure that they can have the best life that they can, but that preparation still can be hard, preparing them for the transition to adulthood, but also preparing yourself for their transition into adulthood can be a little bit difficult. And that's a time, as I said, you might need to touch back into counselling and, to help you let go of the reins a little bit. So I'll leave it there, and thank you all for listening. There'll be a new blog on Monday. I think it's about sibling rivalry this week. Some of the parents that are watching may want to watch that. And I'll just say good morning as always to Deirdre and Colette and Kim and Jennifer. They're my regulars every week, solidly every week. They're brilliant. And to everybody else who watches this in replay, good morning or good afternoon wherever you are. And I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I'll talk to you all again next week. Hi Colette, hi Deirdre. I know they keep texting me every week. It's morning Deborah, morning Deborah. Hi girls. Thank you all for tuning in. So don't forget, this week's blog was at www.deborahbyrnepsychologyservices.com, and I will see you all again next week. And Monday's blog, as I said, is on sibling rivalry in children. Okay, I will be doing a later one in adults because it can happen in adults too. And thank you all for tuning in.